Okay folks, here we are. Last thing I'll probably put out before Christmas. And wow, been an interesting year so far. Anyway, on we go. Outlander is a time-travelling romance drama from Starz, where things be going a bit nuts recently. Episode 713, Hello Goodbye, brings us back to Roger and Buck, who realise that they're standing in the middle of the Andor Dam, and maybe Roger's dad used the stones that are now part of the dam tunnel that we saw back in the normal timeline. So they mooch over in that direction and find a stone circle with a military survival kit lying beside it. Then they find a wee lad who's got Jerry's flight helmet, and turns out that he's just hiding in the woods and he's wanted for stealing a sheep. And they find him and convince him that they're actually from the future and explain how the stones work. And it turns out that Jerry was testing cameras for planes for MI6 during the war, and then he crashed. But then dogs appear and they're off on the run. And the shepherd's boy obviously went and told the cops, but tragically Jerry trips and falls over comedy style. So they leg and hop it back to the stones, where Jerry gets sent back through the stones with the only gemstone they've got, and Roger and Buck skedaddle from the farmer posse. And sometime later, possibly during winter, Buck and Roger are still hanging about there with horses. And they're philosophising about time travel, and Roger realises that in all likelihood, Jem isn't even there. And back in the 1980s, Bree has Cam locked up and starts slapping him about. But the other kid's getting a bit anxious and starts saying that she can feel Jemmy, so Bree decides it's a good idea to use her as a tracking device and go for a drive. And Jemmy, on the other hand, is in a dark place somewhere. But he stumbles onto a hard hat and it turns out he's actually in the tunnel under the dam. And he remembers the directions that Bree gave him when she told him the story of using the power of voiceover. And in the end, he nearly gets run over by Bree because he made it away, problem solved. So they rock back with some cops and of course Cameron's vanished. So the cops look at the situation and decide that this is clearly a case of an affair that's turned nasty, which kind of makes sense considering the evidence they've got and the fact that Bree can't really tell them about the time travel story, but it doesn't make her very happy. So Bree does the sensible thing and sticks the cumbersome kids with Fiona and her husband and decides she's going to get on with figuring things out. And back in the past, the Frasers Co are all at Mercy's house because Ian's getting sad about his dog getting old, and that spurs off some wedding talk because turns out wee Ian and Quaker lass is getting married. Now the pair of them are having a bit of a positive masculinity chat about virginity and the like, and you know, because this is Outlander, it ends up revolving around Claire and her advice being more important than everything else. Meanwhile, the lassies are upstairs talking about dresses and love and not so much the men at all. Seems pretty normal. And Denzel ends up rocking up and he mentions, oh yeah, Jamie, yeah, I saw John and I helped him escape from getting hanged. And Jamie feels kind of conflicted, but you know, because the wedding's on and everything, busy, he kind of forgets about it. And the wedding itself is kind of weird because it's a Quaker one, so they sit in silence until it's time to say their vows, and Claire and Jamie start whispering a bit because, you know, clearly in the days up until this, no one's actually discussed what was going to happen during the wedding that they've been organising. But Denzel ends up overhearing Jamie and says, well, this must be some variation on the quiet game, because he makes Jamie do a speech because he lost. That sets off a chain reaction of everyone wanting to say a little bit about Ian and Rachel, but it all works out in the end, and a wedding happens. And then the pair of them end up getting it on to some candlelight and violins and an awful lot of talk of butts. And Jamie, on the other hand, he's having a bit of a sleepless night thinking about John and Claire bonking and John getting not hanged, and turns out he's still angry with John, but not Claire apparently, even though apparently the pair of them have stolen John's house and they're still sleeping in the same bed that Claire and him did the deed in. But what's really bugging him is William being annoyed with him. So Claire assures him that there's really nothing wrong and he's done nothing wrong. Neither of them have done nothing wrong, as usual. And then it's bonking time again. And the next morning, Ian's got some post-hitch clarity and he makes vows not to be a murdering soldier anymore and to always come back to her and all that good stuff. And Jamie, he's getting back in uniform, which is, as usual, manages to convince Claire somehow that it's all fine for him to go off shooting and getting in danger again. And John, on the other hand, oh yeah, he gets picked up by the rebels and he spins them a story saying that he's Burt Armstrong and they press gang him into service, which is kind of funny if you think about it. Anyone remember that show Turn? About spies? Washington's spies? No? Ugh, never mind. So what did I think? Well, I think this week had an interesting mix of stuff, and by which I mean a mix of good and bad. And overall, I'd say this week was functional at best, not really satisfying. Kind of rushed and slow, in that bad pacing way, with an uneasy balance of both. Decent, but not impressive. Which, to be honest, is kind of how the whole season's gone so far. I will say that the Roger and Buck storyline probably felt the most interesting because it was something that was actually happening. It was a breadcrumb trail and they were following it. And sure, it was kind of cliched at the end that when they found Jerry, they had a chance to chat, but they never had a chance to tell them their names, and then they get interrupted before, they can really get any deeper into it. And Jerry never actually asks any of this stuff. And then as soon as they get back to there, they're still got the dogs chasing them, so they have to toss him into the time tunnel. I mean, it felt very much like the side story that it is, and it definitely felt rushed. And as I said, high point of the episode for me. I like the wee touches, like Buck rubbing his bad heart after the chase, and the fact that Roger does finally figure out that Jemmy isn't there. And I thought the guy who played Roger's dad was decent, good bit of casting, he kind of looks like Richard Rankin. We got to see Buck doing a bit of scary Buck stuff, even though it really doesn't come across the same way as when Graham McTavish did it. But also a bit of resolution to the Bree storyline. And, the fact that Jemmy freed himself was nice, and that, she drove around a bit, managed to find him. Not the most heroic ending to that story. I also get a bit of a chuckle at how she offloads the kids on Fiona, which is kind of convenient from a show point of view and a story one, because lugging 2 kids around makes it tough to go on adventuring, and obviously probably makes it more difficult to film a TV show if you've got to have child actors. The Ian and Rachel wedding and the sex scenes, nicely enough done, nicely enough shot. Scum comedy has its place, as does romance in a story, and this is a payoff to a storyline that I'm sure has fans somewhere. But Lord knows I am not one of those fans. And I'm not cribbing at the work of John Bell or Izzy Wee Wee, and Lord knows that it was good that John didn't do that terrible face from the flashbacks to his previous marriage. But really, I just don't care about Ian and Rachel as characters particularly. There's very little meat to the bones of that storyline. And frankly, the show has really tried and failed to make Ian interesting. More or less since they rescued him from the kidnapping back in season 4. It just hasn't happened. And Rachel, on the other hand, is kind of a dull character because she's so constrained by the Quakerism that she doesn't have much to say or do that isn't quite samey of all the thee and thouing. Also the show just hasn't had time to really develop her as a character in the way it probably should have done, and I imagine the way it probably does in the books. So that's kind of a writing problem and a show problem. And that means a good third or more of this episode was stuff that wasn't very interesting and could have been happily skipped. And look, I know that this is Outlander, but do we need to have everything all about a wedding scene and a sex scene when literally there's a story about a manhunt and a child kidnapping happening in the same episode, and we've got Lord John literally on the lam with a smashed face and a hangman's noose chasing behind him, and nobody seems particularly bothered about that? And more than that, the wedding itself felt like kind of a one-note joke about sitting in a quiet room. It feels very Outlander, that kind of thing, but again, it feels like it fits very badly with all the other storylines, which are 3 races against time with life on the line. And it's a strange choice, and it's one that I'm just used to the show fumbling badly at this point. What seemed to be a worse choice to me, though, was having Jamie and Claire just straight up not giving a toss about John. And not only that, Claire should be pushing Jamie to do something, since neither of them know he's alive and not currently dangling from a rope. It's just assumed that he's fine because he suits the show to say so, which just to me screams that Claire and Jamie are kind of bad people. And that's the real issue. I mean, if the show is clearly more worried that we might have lingering thoughts about whether Jamie and Claire is having a tiff over her drunken infidelity, when she thought that he was fish food, than over the fact that the man who saved her life, and his in the past, has possibly had his neck stretched directly due to Jamie's actions, then frankly that leaves me a little disgusted with the pair of them. And that's a show writing problem, as much as it might just be the source material issue, but it could also be that it's a Kuleshov sort of inconvenience effect caused by moving too many plot lines around in the adaptation, and meaning that we've got really badly contrasting plot moments landing side by side in the episode. And this is just a side thing, but the show seems to be still operating on this fan base loyalty to Jamie and Claire for the first 4 seasons, when they were kind of adventuring heroes striving against a tough world and time travel, rather than seasons 5 to 7, where they're an older pair of immigrant Americans with, frankly, rather a lot of money, power, reputation and prestige, who kind of luck themselves in and out of situations causing havoc in their wake, but they always land on their feet almost every time, and in a nice house with money in their pocket. I mean, Jesus, they literally seem to have stolen John's house at this point. And that's really not a great move for a show where you're trying to base it around these 2 people at the centre. So where does this leave us? Well, clearly this is the point in the story where they're going to break into some new stuff. And by new, I mean kind of business as usual for Outlander, because we've got Jamie going back off to war as usual, which means we're going to get some shooty bang bang stuff, and I imagine we're going to get Claire and possibly also Denzel in tow, sawing off feet and stitching musket wounds and all that good stuff. probably getting into their own wee mini adventures and Claire shouting at people. But we've seen all this countless times, and it's not the worst, it's kind of what the show's based around. But I hope they do something interesting with it. Although it also means we're in the situation where William and Jamie are again on opposite sides of a shooting war, which is exactly what they made a huge fuss about, and Jamie had his big moral conundrum round about episode 8 of season 7 or so. Remember that? Only now there might also be Lord John mooching around as a private on Jamie's side this time until he can escape back to the British side. And I'm sure hijinks will ensue there as well. We've also got Ian's vow not to kill unless he has to, which presumably will put him in a situation where this causes some kind of moral conundrum or gets him in trouble, because, I've seen films and TV shows before. And to be honest, I'm far more interested to see what's happening with Bree and Cameron, because that's been left wide open, and as far as Roger and Buck are concerned, that storyline's kind of hit a dead end. Although I'm kind of confused as to how long they've been in the past now, because they've suddenly got horses and it's snowing, and where are they getting all their money from? I mean, I don't remember them mentioning that, but did they rob a museum? Who knows? And yeah, we're more than halfway through this half season now, so we're 3/4 of the way through season 7, and the show kind of feels like it's become rudderless again. And yeah, I know that the books are kind of meandering, labyrinthine stories that kind of sort of just weave in and around telling a life story. But I can only hope that next week actually pulls the TV show into a consistent direction for the rest of the season and leads into season 8 with some proper impetus and some kind of final plot, rather than all the dithering and muddle, because things at the moment seem to just be all over the place, and it would be nice to think that that's actually all going to come together somehow. But anyway, that's been episode 713, unlucky for some, and for me, these have been my grumpy opinions.